This subject, tracing the contours of constitutional morality, is of immense contemporary relevance, and at the same time, it is something which is very nuanced and which needs to be explored thoroughly. We are the world's largest democracy. We have a 71-year-old constitution, which is perhaps the longest and most detailed constitution the world has ever seen. Now, ours is amongst the older constitutions of the world because at the time when our constitution was enacted in 1950, the practice of having written constitutions was not mainstreamed as much as it is now. Like in the 21st century as well, one would find several new constitutions which have been enacted. So this practice of writing written constitutions has come into the mainstream and has become in vogue in the later half of the 20th century and also in the 21st century. Now, as far as our constitution is concerned, there are two key features of our constitution which help us distinguish it with several other world constitutions. The first feature is that apart from the fundamental rights which are enshrined in Part 3 of the Constitution, the grounds on which the state can impose restrictions on the fundamental rights are also contained in that very Part 3. So, therefore, for example, we see that we have a fundamental right of free speech, which is enshrined in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. At the same time, under Article 19(2), the grounds on which the restriction can be imposed on the freedom of speech and expression, such as public order, law and order, morality, security of the state, and so on and so forth, has also been mentioned in 19(2) of the Constitution. Similarly, in Article 25, which deals with the right to religion, it has been made subject to public order, morality, and health. So, therefore, this is one very important distinguishing feature of our Indian Constitution, that the grounds on which the restrictions can be imposed on the fundamental rights have also been enshrined in the Constitution itself. So, what it basically implies is that if the state wants to restrict, wants to impose any restriction on any fundamental right, it can do so only on the grounds which are enumerated in Part 3 itself. It cannot go beyond that at any cost. This unique feature of our Constitution is very relevant to our discussion today, because whenever we discuss about constitutional morality, we associate it with judicial review, and we will reach the conclusion that whenever the courts have invoked constitutional morality, it has got something to do with a particular ground on which restrictions can be imposed on fundamental rights. So basically, one very important contemporary use of constitutional morality is to test the validity of laws on the anvil of fundamental rights, and therefore to test it also on whether the ground which has been mentioned in the Part 3 itself has been satisfied or not. The second unique feature of our Constitution is that it contains elaborate provisions pertaining to the administration of the affairs of the state. We have specific provisions pertaining to the powers and functions of the president, the governor, the council of ministers at the state and the central level, their appointments, qualifications, and so on and so forth. We have separate chapters pertaining to the local bodies such as the municipality, the panchayats. We have a separate chapter in our constitution pertaining to the cooperative societies. We have elaborate provisions pertaining to elections, the right to vote, election commissioner, the comptroller and auditor general, the SC/ST commission, and so on and so forth. All this has been enumerated in detail in our constitution. Again, this feature of our constitution is also relevant while we discuss the contours of constitutional morality, for the simple reason that if the spirit of the constitution is compromised, then constitutional morality is to come into the picture. And therefore, these detailed provisions pertaining to the forms of the administration, if the administration does not adhere to these provisions and it is run in a manner in which these forms are compromised or the spirit is compromised, then it is contrary to the principles of constitutional morality. Simply put, what constitutional morality means is that the spirit of the constitution must be respected and must not be allowed to be compromised at any cost. This is the sum and substance of constitutional morality. Now we are aware that we have judicial review, which has now become an essential and intrinsic part of our constitutional structure and culture, so to say. By judicial review, what we mean is that any action of the state can be called in question in the High Court or the Supreme Court on the ground that it is violating the constitution or that it is otherwise illegal. Like the distinguishing features I pointed out, there are two distinguishing features. As far as judicial review is concerned, also there are two categorizations of judicial review. The first categorization is that there is a judicial review on the anvil of rights. So whenever any law is challenged on the ground that it violates fundamental rights, the court will step in and examine whether the law is valid or not. This is the first traditional kind of judicial review which we all are aware of. The second form of judicial review pertains to the review of the functioning of the various instrumentalities of the state. We can classify this as a structural review. So for example, in this category, we will see the disputes between the center and the states, or disputes between two states, or dispute between certain instrumentalities of the state. As an example, we may refer to the recent controversy pertaining to the final year examinations, wherein several state governments wanted to pass all students without taking the final year examinations in the wake of COVID. But the University Grants Commission was adamant on taking the final year examination. Ultimately, this question landed up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court had to settle it once and for all. This is one very recent example. Apart from that, in the recent times, we have seen that several governments have been toppled. The roles of the governor and the speakers have assumed a great deal of importance, and there have been allegations pertaining to the nature in which the governor and the speaker are functioning, and that the influences of party politics have come into the functioning of these governors and speakers who are constitutional offices. And rampantly, the actions of the governors and the speakers have been challenged before the high courts as also the Supreme Court. This form of judicial review, which we see, is the structural form of judicial review. Now, undoubtedly, the rights-based review is going to often overlap with this structural review, because even in cases of structural review, more often than not, there is something to do with fundamental rights, which is brought into play in the petition which is filed before the courts. As far as the constitutional morality is concerned, constitutional morality is relevant and it is used by the court in both these instances as highlighted above. So whenever a law is challenged on the ground that it violates fundamental rights or is discriminatory, the court will invoke constitutional morality. It will also invoke constitutional morality in cases wherein there is a conflict between the various instrumentalities of the state. Now, these are two different and distinct uses of constitutional morality, and these two different and distinct uses ought to be examined in some detail, and an attempt must be made to understand which use of constitutional morality is just and proper, and what are the problems with these uses of constitutional morality which will have to be cured. At the outset, I am going to make two very important assertions pertaining to the contours of constitutional morality. Now, you may carefully note these two assertions, because these assertions are going to be the basis of our discussion today. The first assertion which I am making pertains to the second use of constitutional morality. The use of constitutional morality in cases wherein there is judicial review of the functioning of the state, the administration of the affairs of the state, where there is a conflict between the instrumentalities of the state. In such cases where constitutional morality is used, my first assertion is going to be applicable. The first assertion is that constitutional morality may be used by the courts while examining action of the instrumentalities of the state concerning the administration of the affairs of the state. My second assertion pertains to the traditional rights-based review wherein law is challenged on the ground that it violates fundamental rights, or more particularly, that it is discriminatory in nature. To such circumstances, whenever constitutionality or constitutional morality is used, my second assertion becomes relevant. And my second assertion is that use of constitutional morality while testing the validity of laws challenged on the ground that they violate fundamental rights or that they are discriminatory is unnecessary and exposes the amorphous nature of the phrase constitutional morality. Coming to my first assertion first. My first assertion concerns the second distinguishing feature of our constitution, which I highlighted right at the beginning, that the constitution contains elaborate provisions pertaining to the administration of the affairs of the state. And it is here where constitutional morality, according to me, assumes greater significance. we must answer some questions. Why was it deemed necessary to include detailed provisions pertaining to the administration of the state into the constitution? Would it have not been possible to allow the parliament to enact legislation on these subjects? Evidently, in other world constitutions, such elaborate provisions are not contained, and it is left to the legislature to make such provisions. The constitutions are short. The constitution is not a bulky document in most other countries, but we have made an exception. There are detailed provisions in our constitution, and there must be a reason why we have incorporated the detailed provisions in our constitution. The answers to these questions have been provided by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly debates. And the prime reason, according to me, to include these detailed provisions in our constitution seems to be a certain level of distrust in our system and an apprehension that this constitution and this system may not eventually work. Dr. Ambedkar had quoted a famous Greek historian by the name Grote, who had talked about constitutional morality. And ultimately, Dr. Ambedkar had justified as to why these detailed provisions are contained in the constitution. And in this justification of Dr. Ambedkar to include detailed provisions pertaining to administration in the constitution lies the genesis of constitutional morality. I shall now quote Dr. Ambedkar because this passage is really very interesting. And I quote, while everybody recognizes the necessity of the diffusion of constitutional morality for the peaceful working of a democratic constitution, there are two things interconnected with it which are not, unfortunately, generally recognized. One is that the form of administration has a close connection with the form of the constitution. The form of the administration must be appropriate to and in the same sense as the form of the constitution. The other is that it is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution without changing its form by merely changing the form of the administration and to make it inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the constitution. It follows that it is only where people are saturated with constitutional morality, such as the one described by Grote the historian, that one can take the risk of omitting from the constitution details of administration and leaving it for the legislature to prescribe them. The question is, can we presume such a diffusion of constitutional morality? Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. In these circumstances, it is wiser not to trust the legislature to prescribe forms of administration. This is the justification for incorporating them in the constitution. So therefore, we see that Dr. Ambedkar has used the phrase constitutional morality in the Constituent Assembly debates in an entirely different context than what the present use of the phrase is. The present use, the most contemporary use of the phrase, most recent use of the phrase is in the cases of Navtej Singh Johar, Sabrimala and Joseph Shine, wherein the court has used constitutional morality pertaining while examining penal provisions on the ground that they are discriminatory in nature. Whereas when Dr. Ambedkar refers to constitutional morality, he is referring to it in the context of the forms of administration. According to Dr. Ambedkar, the form of the constitution needs to be mentioned in the constitution and given constitutional status without leaving it to the legislature to determine it, because it is perfectly possible that a legislature will compromise the spirit of the constitution when it makes laws pertaining to the administration of the affairs of the state. And he has also admitted that there cannot be a presumption of diffusion of constitutional morality and that our people will have to learn it. What is therefore amply clear is that the reference to constitutional morality was in the context of forms of administration and structures of power. Therefore, keeping Dr. Ambedkar's vision of constitutional morality and his understanding of constitutional morality at the forefront, the court would be justified in using this constitutional morality to invoke the spirit of the constitution. And in fact, the court has done it. The court has invoked constitutional morality in order to ensure that the administration is run in a proper manner and the spirit of the constitution is not compromised. Possible examples where the Supreme Court may invoke constitutional morality in such cases is where the government pocket vetoes recommendations of the Supreme Court Collegium for elevation to judgeship at the High Court and the Supreme Court. This was also recently in news, where the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of India, lamented that several recommendations have been sent to the government, but the government is sitting over those files. Now, in the Constitution, there is no specific timeline which has been provided, that once a recommendation goes, in fact, for that matter, this procedure of collegium is itself not provided in the Constitution. So therefore, these are constitutional silences, which will have to be filled in by invoking constitutional morality. Then again, there are instances where presidents and governors sit over mercy petitions for a long time. Then obviously, laws being passed without consultation, without following the due process of deliberation, is something which is very relevant in today's context. Now, we must also acknowledge that the courts have done this use of constitutional morality in this sense, most recently in the case involving the conflict between the Chief Minister of Delhi and the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, wherein the court has in fact given a treatise on constitutional morality and its use in this context. Now, what Dr. Chandrachud has observed in this particular case is that constitutional morality requires filling in constitutional silences to enhance and complete the spirit of the Constitution. Having said this, we would notice that as far as my first assertion is concerned, that constitutional morality will have to be used in such cases where the administration of the affairs of the state is not done in consonance with the spirit of the Constitution. The court has in fact used constitutional morality in this sense. But use of constitutional morality in this sense is not something which is very common and which has been mainstreamed in our constitutional jurisprudence. The contemporary use, in fact, is pertaining to the rights-based review. And as far as the rights-based review is concerned, the contemporary use of constitutional morality has started from the judgment of the Delhi High Court in the Naz Foundation case, wherein the court had struck down section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, this is perhaps the most famous judgment of the Delhi High Court, authored by Chief Justice A.P. Shah, wherein section 377 was struck down as being contrary to constitutional morality. Now, subsequently, as you may be aware, this case went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court set aside the judgment of the Delhi High Court. And subsequently, a 5-judge bench was constituted, and in Navtej Singh Johar, the Supreme Court's previous view was overruled, and ultimately section 377 was struck down. The significance of Naz Foundation judgment cannot be ignored, because it is in the Naz Foundation judgment that the court has invoked constitutional morality to say that the state cannot use public morality to justify invasion of the zone of privacy of an individual and thereby violate constitutional morality. So therefore, the court said that there is no compelling state interest involved here. The judgment in Naz Foundation is significant on two counts, at least two counts. First is that it sets out the limits of substantive criminal law. It recognizes the right not to be unjustly criminalized and brings wrongful harm to the forefront. Thus, criminal law will spring into action only if wrongful harm is caused. If there is no harm, then criminal law cannot be invoked. And harm, now this is interesting, harm is to be determined on the normative framework of constitutional morality. This is the first significant contribution of Naz Foundation. You will have to put the harm at the forefront while criminalizing an act and accordingly examine whether it adheres to constitutional morality or not. The second foundation, second strong significant contribution is that Naz Foundation pitches for the first time public morality against constitutional morality and says that compelling state interest cannot be on the ground of public morality but has to be only on the ground of constitutional morality. This is the genesis of the use of constitutional morality while examining the validity of the laws on the anvil of fundamental rights. As I pointed out earlier, the genesis of constitutional morality as far as the administration of the affairs of state is concerned lies in the speech of Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly debates. But the genesis of this new form of constitutional morality is in the judgment of the Naz Foundation, which was delivered by the Delhi High Court. Now, we are all aware that this judgment was set aside, and then Navtej Singh Johar emphatically declared further, after the Suresh Kumar Kaushal versus Naz Foundation judgment was delivered, it was overruled in Navtej Singh Johar, where the court emphatically has declared that consensual sexual acts between consenting adults cannot be criminalized. In Navtej Singh Johar as well, there are references to constitutional morality, and the court has reiterated that the constitutional morality will come to the rescue of sexual minorities. The next significant and much criticized use of constitutional morality was in the Sabrimala case, where the court held that morality, which is a ground to restrict Article 25. Now, you may recollect that in Article 25, Article 25 starts with the word subject to public order, morality, and health. So, court held that morality, which is a ground to restrict Article 25, is governed by constitutional principles and not by social conception, which keep changing. It held that the exclusionary practices are derogatory to preambular values of liberty, dignity, and equality. Thus, in public law conversations on religion and morality, constitutional morality must prevail. This judgment was subject to several criticism and this view taken by the court. In fact, now there is a 9 judgment which has been constituted, and this is a specific question as to whether constitutional morality, or the morality in Article 25 means constitutional morality or not. Then there is also the case of Joseph Schein, where the court struck down as unconstitutional the offense of adultery as contained in section 497 of the Indian Penal Code. Now here again, the court holds that in view of the changing social, cultural, moral, economic, and political values, and in the wake of evolving notions of transformative constitutionalism and constitutional moralism, adultery cannot be criminalized. The provision was held to be contrary to constitutional morality. We have now seen how constitutional morality has been used by the courts in recent times pertaining to challenges to discriminatory penal provisions. Now, the assigning of the definition, assigning of the meaning to the word morality has therefore assumed relevance. Court has understood morality as meaning constitutional morality and not public morality. And here is where the first challenge to this understanding of constitutional morality lies. And here is where there is one opinion is there that the court is now unnecessarily treading in troubled waters, and this was wholly unnecessary. We must notice that the word morality has been used in the constitution at least 3 places. Now, this discussion is relevant because we are trying to ascertain the meaning of the word morality, whether we use the prefix constitutional or whether we use the prefix public. This word morality has been used at 3 places. First, it has been used in Article 19(2), where the freedom of speech, restrictions on the freedom of speech are contemplated, and wherein it has been held that it has been stated that the freedom of speech can be restricted on the ground of public order, decency, and morality. Then it is used as a restriction on the right to form associations, which is contained in Article 19(1)(c), which can be restricted on the ground of public order and morality. Then finally in Article 25, which has been subject to public order, morality, and health. Thus, one would notice that the word morality has been used in conjunction with public order, and therefore it must mean public morality and not constitutional morality. There are again 2 justifications for so interpreting the word morality. The first is that the word health, as contained in Article 25, has been interpreted by the courts on numerous occasions to mean public health. The word health again is also similarly used in conjunction with the word public order, and it has been meant public health. Therefore, morality will also have to be so interpreted. The second justification, and which is according to me more important, is that the Supreme Court itself has on numerous occasions justified the use of public morality to restrict fundamental rights. And this is where the 3 judgments of Navtej Singh Johar, Sabrimala, and Joseph Schein are landing in troubled waters. In K.A. Abbas, again a constitution bench judgment, 5-judge bench judgment authored by Justice Hidayatullah, provisions relating to censorship contained in the Cinematograph Act were challenged before the Honorable Supreme Court. The apex court held that censorship of films is a valid exercise of power in the interests of public morality and decency. Therefore, here the court has justified the restrictions on the ground of public morality. Then there is also the famous case of Mr. X versus Hospital Z, which pertained to the release of certain private medical information. The court had held that public morality can determine the precedence of one competing fundamental right over another. Here again, the term public morality has been used. Pertaining to the liquor prohibitions, you will be interested to note that to trade in liquor is not even recognized as a right. It has been held to be res extra commercium, which means beyond the pale of commerce. Why has it been held to be beyond the pale of commerce? Because the basis of such holding lies in public morality and social morality. Similarly, there is also a case of RMD Chamar Bagwan, wherein the question was pertaining to the right to carry out gambling transactions. That was the question before the court, and again the court held that such a right cannot qualify as a fundamental right at all. It is thus very, very apparent and very clear that morality has been consistently interpreted by the court to mean public morality and not constitutional morality. And in view of this, the judgments of Sabrimala, Joseph Shine, and Nautej are standing on some problematic footings. There is yet another very important reason why the usage of constitutional morality in this context becomes questionable. Constitutional morality is based on interpretation of the spirit of the Constitution or upon the collective meaning that one can assign to all the provisions of the Constitution. This is where the subjectivity creeps in. A particular bench of the Supreme Court, while examining a particular penal provision on the ground that it violates constitutional morality, may hold that the Constitution is a rights advancing Constitution, and therefore the provision is violative of the constitutional morality because the collective conscience of the Constitution appears to be rights oriented. And this is what the contemporary understanding of constitutional morality and the contemporary understanding of the Constitution itself is. The Supreme Court today is understanding the Constitution in such a sense. It has held that it is a Constitution which is a living document, an organic document which is to be interpreted in light of the changing times. And particularly it has attached another morality to such an interpretation of the Constitution. And it has said that the Constitution is a document which furthers individual rights. It will have to be progressively interpreted to give further meaning to the individual rights, and the restrictions will be frowned upon. In Nautej, Sabrimala, and Joseph Shine, the court would have reached the same conclusion and the same results without at all invoking constitutional morality. Because when I say that the judgments in Nautej, Sabrimala, and Joseph Shine are problematic because of their use of constitutional morality, it does not follow that the judgment will turn on its head. It does not follow that sections 377 and 497 and the section of the Kerala legislation pertaining to the entry of women into that shrine are constitutionally valid. That is not what the conclusion is. If the court is to set aside those provisions, if the court is to strike down those provisions, the court can do so simply by observing that the provisions are discriminatory in nature, or that they are manifestly arbitrary, or that they are unreasonable, and that they have no reasonable nexus with the object that is sought to be achieved, and therefore strike it down without going into constitutional morality at all. So therefore, when the constitutional morality is invoked, and when it is said that it is the spirit of the Constitution which is to be protected, the next question which is to be answered is, what in fact is the spirit of the Constitution? When we say that there is a collective meaning which is to be assigned to the Constitution, how do we really assign the collective meaning to the Constitution? One particular reasoning to say that it is a rights-oriented Constitution and not a duty-oriented or a restriction-oriented Constitution is that the provisions pertaining to the grounds on which restrictions can be imposed are contained in the Constitution. But in fact, there can also be a possible other interpretation, that given that the restrictions are specifically enumerated in the Constitution, unlike in the US Constitution where restrictions are not contemplated, the US Constitution, the Supreme Court has recognized the police state and recognized the restriction on the fundamental rights which have been imposed by the state without there being any particular recourse to any particular provision of the Constitution. Given that in our Constitution restrictions have been contemplated, it may even mean that it is a Constitution which gives more power to the state to impose restrictions. So therefore, this particular use of constitutional morality, when it is pertaining to the domain of the rights-oriented review, particularly with respect to discriminatory provisions, is problematic because there are several pathological problems of interpretation of widely worded provisions. And if a particular meaning is assigned to a particular provision without recourse to the history of that provision, or without recourse to the manner in which the provisions have been interpreted previously, then obviously subjectivity is going to loom in, and therefore it is going to be subject matter of criticism and debate. This obviously does not mean that constitutional morality is a wholly useless doctrine or that it is of no aid whatsoever. In fact, according to me, constitutional morality is the best thing that has happened to Indian constitutional jurisprudence if it is used in the proper context and it is used in the proper sense in which the makers of the constitution thought it fit to be used. I have highlighted two kinds of the usage of constitutional morality. It is the use of constitutional morality to keep a check on the instrumentalities of the state, which is a use which is it is going to be very helpful, and it is going to be very relevant in the future as well. And in fact, as I pointed out earlier, this particular use of constitutional morality has found recognition with the Supreme Court. Dr. Chandrachud in the Delhi LG versus Delhi CM judgment has particularly pointed out that wherever the constitution is silent, to fill those constitutional silences, constitutional morality can be invoked. We are all aware of the conflicts pertaining to the farm laws and the judgment of the Supreme Court staying the farm laws. It is very apparent that the court has stayed the farm laws without going into any legal question as to their validity. In the hearings, the Chief Justice of India has remarked that the government has failed to carry out consultations. Whenever a legislature passes laws, it is expected that the laws be passed with due deliberation and after discussion. And if such discussions do not happen, then though the passage of such law may be valid, it is surely antithetical to constitutional morality. This does not justify the stay that has been imposed by the Supreme Court. That is a subject matter of an entirely different debate. And whether the farm laws are good or bad is a subject matter of an entirely different debate. But here is where constitutional morality can help us, though not specifically pertaining to the farm law challenge. But here is where constitutional morality will help us, where the instrumentalities of the state are functioning in a manner in which the spirit of the constitution appears to be compromised in certain cases. We have also seen several instances that when once the election results are declared, a political party comes to power and grants pardons and reprieves to the party cadre who have been accused of certain offenses and the trials are going on. Because as you all may be aware, in the Code of Criminal Procedure, there are provisions pertaining to mercies and pardons and reprieves. And the state governments on several occasions have used these provisions arbitrarily. Then again, there are also instances where the office of the speaker and the governor has been subjected to severe criticism for acting in a partisan manner. We may take instances where certain bills are passed as money bills. Now, as you all may be aware, in the constitution, it is the speaker who will decide whether a particular law is a money bill or not. And there is a special procedure for passing of money bills, where to a certain extent the Rajya Sabha may be bypassed. So therefore, if bills which have got nothing to do with finance or commerce are passed as money bills, and if that decision is challenged before the apex court, what is the apex court to do? If it is patently clear that the particular bill is not a money bill, the court cannot simply lay its hands off. It is in such circumstances that the court may invoke constitutional morality to say that though we cannot sit in judgment over the decision of the speaker as to whether a bill is a money bill or not, we would not hesitate to invoke constitutional morality where patent errors on the face of the record are evident. Such use of constitutional morality is again going to be in the domain of the forms of administration or the structural review and not the rights-based review. During the 1960s and 70s, there were several instances where the central government used to rampantly impose precedent rule in several states governed by opposition parties. However, after the judgment of S.R. Bommai, such practices were curtailed. Now, the judgment in S.R. Bommai is a treatise on the subject of defections. Though there is no great reference to constitutional morality, it is in fact constitutional morality that the judgment tries to advance when it imposes restrictions, or rather when it enumerates the grounds on which the governor has to satisfy himself and recommend to the president for the imposition of the president's rule. So you will see that after the judgment in SR Bommai, in recent times, such imposition of precedence rule has been, such practices have been curtailed. And again, admittedly, there is no specific provision in the constitution which imposes any such restriction on imposition of precedence rule by the central government. So the constitution is silent, but the court has stepped in and ensured that constitutional morality will prevail. Similarly, there are other cases as well where pertaining to the role of the governor, where the central government previously had, once the party in power changes, the governors were rampantly removed from their offices. Once the governors are removed from offices, what recourse do they have? Under the constitution, there is no express provision in this regard. But at the same time, the court has recognized on several occasions that a governor's office is not a political office. He is not a representative of the central government as a political person. So once the government at the center changes, if governors are rampantly removed just because of different political affiliation, the court will step in and examine the material which has been placed on record before the president when he takes a decision to remove a particular governor. This exercise is again an exercise in constitutional morality. There are several landmark judgments. BP Singhal is one very famous constitution bench judgment in this regard, where the court has issued certain guidelines on pertaining to the removal of governor from his office and pertaining to the office of governor at large. There is no reference whatsoever in this judgment as well to constitutional morality. But here again, what the court has done is it has invoked constitutional morality in order to come to the rescue of such instances where governors are removed and political pathologies are wreaking havoc in the system. So thus, if constitutional morality is interpreted in this manner, it is a very useful tool in the hands of the judiciary. But at the same time, if it is brought into play in cases involving challenges to laws alleged to be discriminatory, it may become a subject matter of legitimate criticism and may also be hit by the subjective opinions of the judges on the bench. So therefore, I come back to the two assertions that I made right at the beginning. The first assertion was pertaining to the administration of the affairs of the state and the use of constitutional morality, where I seek to justify the use of constitutional morality by the courts when examining the action of the instrumentalities of the state. The second assertion pertained to the use of constitutional morality while testing the validity of laws challenged on the ground that they violate fundamental rights. And I had asserted that such use of constitutional morality is unnecessary and exposes the amorphous nature of the phrase of constitutional morality. Now, here again, this assertion also is legitimate and it is seen to be proved subject to some legitimate counter opinions in this regard. But this criticism is also, this is a very popular criticism of constitutional morality. That when it comes to penal legislation, you do not invoke constitutional morality unless it is very necessary. And you can simply strike down penal legislation on the ground that it violates Article 21 or that it is discriminatory in nature and there is no reasonable nexus with the object that is sought to be achieved. A counter to this criticism is also available in the Naz Foundation judgment itself, wherein the court had brought in the harm theory. The harm theory basically means that if there is no harm caused, there cannot be any crime. And if there are consenting adults involved in an act, then there is no harm and therefore there is no crime. To invoke this harm theory, there is no justification to bring in constitutional morality. The harm theory can be read into Article 21 in any case to say that a penal statute can be sustained only if there is harm caused and there is a legitimate compelling state interest in order to curb such harm. Where there is no such harm, the criminal law cannot come into the picture. And to do this, I don't think the use of constitutional morality or transformative constitutionalism is necessary. What we are losing sight of in the recent times when the constitutional morality doctrine has been used is we are losing sight of the original understanding of constitutional morality by Dr. Ambedkar and the original use of constitutional morality in several judgments. Though there is no express mention, if you are to go to see the use of the phrase constitutional morality in the judgments of the Supreme Court, you will find that there is no express mention in the judgments in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. But in fact, what the court has done in several such judgments, be it SR Bommai, be it the dissent in ADM Jabalpur, or be it the judgments in the Madhavrao Scindia case, several such judgments, for that matter, even Keshavananda Bharati and Minerva Mills, what the court has done is that it has done an exercise in constitutional morality in order to ensure that the administration of the state is done in a manner conducive to the spirit of the constitution, and that the instrumentalities of the state do not take advantage of a particular silence in the constitution so as to compromise the spirit of the constitution. And therefore that use of constitutional morality needs to come back and spring into picture, and this new use, or the new constitutional morality as we may call it, needs to be curbed. These tendencies to use constitutional morality in this new novel manner need to be curbed, for the simple reason that use of constitutional morality in this sense is wholly unnecessary according to me. So therefore, according to me, constitutional morality is a beautiful servant, but it is a very dangerous master. Thank you.